So welcome to this SVT Dhamma talk. And today we'll be looking at the factors of enlightenment. So before we start, let's just recognize the virtues of the Buddha. So Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa. Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa. Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa. Okay, so welcome everyone. And today I'll be looking at a number of different suttas from the Samyutta Nikaya. And the Samyutta Nikaya is a wonderful collection, and they're grouped by topic. And there is a whole chapter, chapter 46, on the factors of enlightenment. Now, the factors of enlightenment are, I believe, the defining difference between the Buddha's teaching and teaching that was common at the time that Buddha was alive. And I hope in the extracts that we're going to be looking at today, we'll get to see some of the Buddha's perspective on why these factors are so important. So to start off, I'm going to start off with Samyutta Nikaya 46:54, accompanied by loving kindness. And I'll just be reading extracts out of these suttas because I want to link them through to, if you like, an overall picture of the factors of enlightenment. So here, on one occasion, the Blessed One was dwelling among the Kalyans, where there was a town of the Kalyans named Vasana. Then in the morning, a number of bhikkhus dressed and taking their bowls and robes entered Vasana for alms. Then it occurred to them, it is too early for the walk for alms. Let us go to the park of the wanderers of other sects. So they went off to that park, and the members of the other sects asked them, what do they practice? And they said that the Buddha taught them abandon the 5 hindrances, the corruptions of mind that weaken wisdom, and dwell pervading 1/4 of a mind with loving kindness and all the other quarters, and above and below, across and everywhere. So this is the expansive cultivation of loving kindness, and equally do that with compassion, with sympathetic joy, and with equanimity. Now, after they'd explained that, the students of the other sects and their teachers said, we too, friends, teach the Dhamma to our disciples thus. Come, friends, abandon the 5 hindrances and cultivate loving kindness. So, friends, what here is the distinction, the disparity, the difference between the ascetic Gautama, that's the Buddha, and us. That is, in regarding the one Dharma teaching and the other, regarding the one manner of instruction and the other. So the bhikkhus were neither delighted nor rejected the statement of those wanderers. Without delighting in it, without rejecting it, they rose from their seats and left thinking, we shall learn the meaning of this statement in the presence of the Blessed One. So maybe these were really quite novice bhikkhus, and they didn't understand the full teaching of what the Buddha had said, and so needed to go back and ask him, what is the difference? It really does sound rather similar. So they went to the Blessed One and explained all that had happened. And the Blessed One said, bhikkhus, when wanderers of other sects speak thus, they should be asked, friends, how is the liberation of the mind by loving kindness developed? What does it have as to its destination, its culmination, its fruit, its final goal? So it's not enough simply to develop loving kindness. There needs to be a direction of development. How is the liberation of the mind by compassion developed? What does it have as its destination, its culmination, its fruit, and its final goal? The same way with sympathetic joy and equanimity. Being asked thus, those wanderers would not be able to reply, and further they would meet with vexation. For what reason? Because that would not be within their domain. In other words, it wouldn't be within the range of their practice. I do not see anyone, bhikkhus, in this world with its devas, mara, and brahma, in this generation with its ascetics and brahmins, its devas and humans, who could satisfy the mind with an answer to these questions, except the Tathagata, that's the Buddha, or a disciple of the Tathagata, or one who has heard it from them. And how, bhikkhus, is the liberation of mind by loving kindness developed? What does it have as its destination, its culmination, its fruit, and its final goal? So the Buddha here is interested in the liberation of the mind, not simply the development of the loving kindness itself. Here, because a bhikkhu develops the enlightenment factor of mindfulness, accompanied by loving kindness. The enlightenment factor, and this takes us through all of the enlightenment factors of investigation or inquiry into states, the enlightenment factor of energy, the enlightenment factor of joy, the enlightenment factor of tranquility, the enlightenment factor of collectedness, and the enlightenment factor of equanimity, accompanied by loving kindness based on seclusion, dispassion, and cessation, maturing in release. So here the Buddha is identifying that the practice must also be intimately linked with the factors of enlightenment. He goes on, if he wishes, may I dwell perceiving and it says here, the repulsive in the unrepulsive. Well, we need to think of repulsive in the terms of the energy that of avoidance, and the unrepulsive is the energy of attraction. Yeah. So when we repulse something, we push it away. When we're unrepulsive, then we're engaging with it in a way which is allowing it to come in. So, may I dwell perceiving the repulsive in the unrepulsive. He dwells perceiving the repulsive therein. If he wishes, may I dwell perceiving the unrepulsive in the repulsive. He dwells perceiving the unrepulsive therein. If he wishes, may I dwell perceiving the repulsive in the unrepulsive and in the repulsive. He dwells perceiving the repulsive therein. If he wishes, may I dwell perceiving the unrepulsive in the repulsive and in the unrepulsive. He dwells perceiving the unrepulsive therein. So what this is simply saying is that whenever there's a sense of pushing away, he has the capacity to see the welcoming in. Anytime he sees the welcoming in, he has the capacity to see the pushing away. In other words, any of this pull and push that we notice in our practice, he's able to see the opposite. So this is about bringing the mind back into balance. So Bhante Ramsay, you would always talk about the 6 R's being a recognition of when we have taken something personally. Now, whenever we've taken something personally, we have two reactions. We're either attracted to it or we're repulsed by it. And the purpose of the 6 R's is to bring that back into balance. And that's what this passage is talking about seeing the unrepulsive in the repulsive or seeing the repulsive in the unrepulsive. It's about, how do I bring my mind back into balance? It's not about cultivating a mind that discards everything. No. The Buddha was very clear. In our experience, Vedana, there's pleasant and unpleasant, and neither pleasant or unpleasant, and that's not under our control. What's under our control is our reaction to the pleasant, or our reaction to the unpleasant, or our reaction to the neither pleasant nor unpleasant. So our reaction to the pleasant is to see the mind's inclination to pull in and to release from that. In the unpleasant, to see the mind's inclination to push away and to release from that. And in the neither pleasant nor unpleasant is to see the mind's tendency to, ignorance, to vacillation, to non-engagement, and to come into a place of equanimity. Avoiding both the unrepulsive and the repulsive, may I dwell equanimously, mindful and clearly comprehending. So here we are. Here's the full expression, if you like, of the 6 R's. The 6 R's is about bringing the mind back into equanimity. So we avoid both the unrepulsive and the repulsive. Or else he enters and dwells in the deliverance of the beautiful. Bhikkhus, the liberation of mind by loving kindness has the beautiful as its culmination, I say. For a wise bhikkhu here who has not penetrated to a superior liberation. So whilst we're on the path, we're not arahants. We haven't had the ultimate liberation. But this releasing away from and this avoidance of the unrepulsive and the repulsive leads to the experience of delivering the mind through, if you like, dwells in the deliverance of the beautiful. So when the mind is becoming expansive and open. So here the Buddha has clearly defined the importance of the factors of enlightenment to the practice, because it inclines the mind towards deliverance. But there are other passages where he's even more explicit than this. So if I just go to the next one, this is looking at the Sutta 46.7. So chapter 46 is the Bhujanga Samyutta, and this is Sutta number 7. It's called the Peaked House. Bhikkhus, just as all the rafters of a peaked house slant, slope, and incline towards the roof peak, so too, when a bhikkhu develops and cultivates the 7 factors of enlightenment, he slants, slopes, and inclines towards nibbana. And how is this so? Here, bhikkhus, a bhikkhu develops the enlightenment factor of mindfulness, which is based upon seclusion, dispassion, and cessation, maturing on release. He develops the enlightenment factor of investigation of states, the enlightenment factor of energy, the enlightenment factor of joy, the enlightenment factor of tranquility, the enlightenment factor of samadhi, which we call collectedness, and the enlightenment factor of equanimity. All of these are based upon seclusion, dispassion, and cessation maturing on in release. It is in this way that a bhikkhu develops and cultivates the 7 factors of enlightenment, so that he slants, slopes, and inclines towards nibbana. So it is the factors of enlightenment that incline our mind, give it that direction. So there's nothing within mindfulness itself which inclines the mind in that direction. We can be mindful of many different things, but mindfulness is a tool, and it's about how we apply the tool. So with the mindfulness as our foundation, we need to develop in a particular direction. And the factors of enlightenment are very helpful here. And I'm going to just go into another sutta now, which describes what actually happens. Okay, so this is Sutta 46.3, and it's called Virtue. Bhikkhus, those bhikkhus who are accomplished in virtue, accomplished in concentration, accomplished in wisdom, accomplished in liberation, accomplished in the knowledge and vision of liberation. Even the sight of those bhikkhus is helpful, I say. Even listening to them, even approaching them, even attending on them, even recollecting them, even going forth after them is helpful, I say. For what reason? Because when one has heard the Dhamma from such bhikkhus, one dwells withdrawn by way of 2 kinds of withdrawal: withdrawal of the body and withdrawal of the mind. Dwelling thus withdrawn, one recollects that Dhamma and thinks it over. When a bhikkhu dwelling thus withdrawn recollects that Dhamma and thinks it over, on that occasion, the enlightenment factor of mindfulness is aroused. So, being in contact with the Dhamma, reflecting upon the Dhamma and the qualities of the Buddha and the explanation of the Dhamma encourages us to develop mindfulness. On that occasion, let me just repeat there. Whenever a bhikkhu dwelling thus withdrawn recollects the Dhamma and thinks it over, on that occasion, the enlightenment factor of mindfulness is aroused by the bhikkhu. On that occasion, the bhikkhu develops the enlightenment factor of mindfulness. On that occasion, the enlightenment factor of mindfulness comes to fulfillment by development in the bhikkhu. Okay, so now we have this foundation of mindfulness that's based on the Dhamma. Because we can be mindful of anything, if you like, apply our attention to it. But now we're beginning to have it conditioned by Dhamma. Dwelling thus mindful, he discriminates that Dhamma with wisdom, examines it, and makes an investigation of it. So having heard the Dhamma, with the eye of mindfulness, we begin to see things. So the Dhamma might be about impermanence, for instance, and then we begin through our meditation to begin to understand and investigate the nature of impermanence. Or it might be the nature of not being in control, anatta. And then we begin to see, as we apply mindfulness to our daily experience, how we're not able to control certain things. Or in our meditation, how we can't determine our mind state. We can observe it and watch it. We can develop a relationship to it, but we can't control it in that sense. We can't dial up nibbana by will. We have to do this by development. Yeah. Whenever a bhikkhu dwelling thus mindfully discriminates that Dhamma with wisdom, examines it, makes an investigation of it, on that occasion, the enlightenment factor of discrimination of states is aroused in the bhikkhu. On that occasion, the bhikkhu develops the enlightenment factor of discrimination of states. On that occasion, the enlightenment factor of discrimination of states comes to fulfillment by development in the bhikkhu. So the mindfulness informed by Dhamma brings investigation of states. Okay, so this is an unfolding of the factors of enlightenment. While he discriminates that Dharma with wisdom, examines it, makes an investigation of it, his energy is aroused without slacking. So here's the second factor of enlightenment that's coming as a natural consequence of the investigation of states. Energy comes. When his energy is aroused, there arises in him spiritual joy. So here's the joy coming as a consequence of the energy, which was a consequence of the investigation of states, which was a consequence of the mindfulness applied through the eye of Dharma, through the perspective of Dharma. For one whose mind is uplifted by joy, the body becomes tranquil. So here's the next factor of enlightenment. And the mind becomes tranquil. So we have an impact on the body and the mind. Whenever, because the body becomes tranquil and the mind becomes tranquil, in a bhikkhu whose mind is uplifted by joy, on that occasion, the enlightenment factor of tranquility is aroused. So, one factor of the enlightenment feeds the next. For one whose body is tranquil and who is happy, the mind becomes collected. This is samadhi. Whenever, because the mind becomes concentrated in a bhikkhu whose body is tranquil and who is happy, on that occasion, the enlightenment factor of concentration is aroused by the bhikkhu. He closely looks on with equanimity at the mind thus concentrated. Whenever a bhikkhu closely looks on with equanimity at the mind thus concentrated, on that occasion, the enlightenment factor of equanimity is aroused. On that occasion, the bhikkhu develops the enlightenment factor of equanimity. On that occasion, the enlightenment factor of equanimity comes to fulfillment by development in the bhikkhu. Bhikkhus, when these 7 factors of enlightenment have been developed and cultivated in this way, 7 fruits and benefits may be expected. And he goes on to explain how different attainments can come from this. Attainment of final knowledge at different stages in the life cycle. So the important thing here is to recognize that the enlightenment factors here, one feeds the next. But the key at the start is to have the mindfulness reflecting on Dharma. That's the foundation. Okay, so from that, I'm just going to move to another sutta. Okay, so what actually sustains the factors of enlightenment? What feeds them? So this is in the Samyutta Nikaya. It's again chapter 46. It's Sutta 2, and it's the second part. The first part describes the nutriments for the hindrances, and the hindrances would take us away from the factors of enlightenment. But the second part talks about the nutriments for the factors of enlightenment. Bhikkhus, just as this body, sustained by nutriment, subsists independent on nutriment and does not subsist without nutriment, so too the 7 factors of enlightenment, sustained by nutriment, subsist independent on nutriment and do not subsist without nutriment. And what, bhikkhus, is the nutriment for the arising of the unarisen enlightenment factor of mindfulness and the fulfillment by development of the arisen enlightenment factor of mindfulness? Here, there are, bhikkhus, things that are the basis for the enlightenment factor of mindfulness. Frequently giving attention to them is the nutriment, the arising of the unarisen enlightenment factor of mindfulness, and for the fulfillment of it. So we've already seen that associating with the Dhamma, with the teaching, reflecting on the teaching, this is an aspect of mindfulness which is supporting the factors of enlightenment. And what, bhikkhus, is the nutriment for the arising of the unarisen factor of the discrimination of states, and for the fulfillment by development of the arisen enlightenment factor of the discrimination of states? There are, bhikkhus, wholesome and unwholesome states, dark and bright states, with their counterparts. Frequently giving careful attention to them is the nutriment for the arising of the unarisen enlightenment factor of the discrimination of states. So this is the investigation. So wholesome and unwholesome states. Well, Bhante Vimramsi was always talking about the wholesome and the unwholesome. And with the wholesome, perhaps we should go with the unwholesome first of all. He would have a definition of the unwholesome which wasn't about good or bad, but was about whether we'd taken something personally or not. So when we take something personally, this leads to unwholesome states. And why is that? Well, when we take something personally, we're making it me, mine, or my own. We're drawing it in within us. And there's a lot of talk these days about the way trauma, for instance, is cultivated, or the way that trauma is experienced. And one of the ways that's described is that trauma isn't something that happens to us, but it's something that we do to ourselves. It's something that happens inside us. And the reason it's described like that is the fact that 2 different people can experience exactly the same circumstances, and one has a traumatic response and one does not. And what is the difference between them? Well, the difference is, as the Buddha described, that we have this tendency when we experience things to take them as me, as mine, as my own. It's a very human response to have. And the definition of taking things personally as unwholesome is something that Bhante Vimramsi was very keen to distinguish. And he said there's a way of working with this, a way of releasing away from the unwholesome, taking things personally. I mean, we can take pleasant things personally as well. And that is to use the 6 R's. Because he said, whenever we take something personally, what we discover is that there is tension in the body. And with that tension comes the process of liking or disliking. And it is the liking or disliking, the attachment or the aversion, which fuels the hindrances and would take us away from the factors of enlightenment. So the investigation of states is all about recognizing the wholesome and the unwholesome. Yes. So we've gone through the nutriment for mindfulness, the nutriment for investigation of states. Okay. So there are bhikkhus, wholesome and non-wholesome states, blamable and blameless states, inferior and superior states, dark and bright states with their counterparts. Frequently giving careful attention to them is the nutriment for the arising of the unarisen enlightenment factor of the discrimination of states. So careful attention. And what bhikkhus is the nutriment for the arising of the unarisen factor of energy? There are bhikkhus the element of the arousal, the element of endeavor, and the element of exertion. So the way that this is described is indicating that when we have the energy for something, so if we imagine doing any task, we have that initial enthusiasm to do it. But if we're not careful, that will wane away very quickly. But if we persist with that initial enthusiasm, then we get this sort of intermediate state, where we're applying ourselves. Yes, and we're beginning to get some momentum in what we're doing. Yes, and then if we could persist with that, we get the full energy that comes as a consequence of that application. So what's being described here in the arousal, the endeavor, and the exertion is the development of that energy. So perseverance is an important part of developing the energy. Frequently giving careful attention to this is the nutriment for the arousing of the unarisen enlightenment factor of energy. And what bhikkhus is the nutriment for the arising of the unarisen enlightenment factor of joy and for its fulfillment by development. There are bhikkhus things that are the basis for the enlightenment factor of joy. Frequently giving careful attention to them is the nutriment for the arising of the unarisen enlightenment factor of joy. And one of these is generosity of spirit. Dana gives joy. Generosity. Yes. I got a reference here. I'll just go over. Let's see. Here we are. So this is talking about aspects of mindfulness. Here, and this is referencing 47, Samyutta Nikaya 47.10. It's called the Bhikkhunis Quarter. Here, Ananda, a bhikkhu dwells contemplating the body as body, ardent, clearly comprehending, mindful, having removed covetousness and displeasure in regard to the world. When he is contemplating the body as body, there arises in him, based on the body, either a fever in the body or a sluggishness of mind. So this is a fever in the body is like an impassioned response in the body. And so we don't particularly wish it for either of these. Or the mind is distracted outwardly. So this is when our mind in the meditation it gets distracted. That bhikkhu should then direct his mind towards some inspiring sign. So that might be remembering some aspect of the Dhamma or some aspect of the virtues of the Buddha. When he directs his mind towards some inspiring sign, gladness is born. And when he is gladdened, joy is born. When the mind is uplifted by joy, the body becomes tranquil. So here's the way of developing joy, reflecting on the Dhamma, reflecting on the Buddha. going back to 46.2, and what bhikkhus is the nutriment for the arising of the unarisen enlightenment factor of tranquility. Because tranquility of body, tranquility of mind, frequently giving careful attention to them, is the nutriment for the unarisen enlightenment factor of tranquility. So, tranquility of body and tranquility of mind. Remember what was said in the Samyutta Sutta. Breathing in, we tranquilize the mind. Breathing out of the body. Breathing out, we tranquilize the body. Okay. And this is what Bhante Ramsey defined as using the 6 R's. We use the 6 R's to bring about that sense of tranquility in the mind and in the body. Sorry, my cat here is wishing to claw my leg. So that is just introduce Pipkin. She's our Dharma cat, and she's testing my tranquility. Okay. So by working with the 6 R's, we cultivate this tranquility of mind. Yeah? We bring it back from that engagement and taking things personally back to a sense of spaciousness and openness in our mind and in our body. And what bhikkhus is the nutriment for the arising of the unarisen enlightenment factor of concentration, for the fulfillment by development of the arisen enlightenment factor of concentration. There are bhikkhus the sign of serenity, the sign of dispersal, of non-dispersal. So what does that concentration look like? Well, it's when the mind settles down. It's not dispersed out. It's not engaging outward. And this is the sign. And the sense of serenity is the sign of letting the mind calm down. So as these signs appear, we give attention to these rather than to other things. Not in the sense of holding on to them, because that's not the purpose, but just as a signpost that the mind is inclining towards the calmness and the serenity that we're looking for. If we hold on to them, then we tend to stop our meditation. Whereas if we just treat it as a signpost saying, we're moving in the right direction now, and just continue to practice. Frequently giving careful attention to them is the nutriment for the arising of the unarisen enlightenment factor of concentration, for the fulfillment by development of the arisen enlightenment factor of concentration. And what bhikkhus is the nutriment for the arising of the unarisen enlightenment factor of equanimity, and for the fulfillment by development of the arisen enlightenment factor of equanimity. There are bhikkhus things that are the basis of the enlightenment factor of equanimity. Frequently giving careful attention to them is the nutriment for the arising of the unarisen factor of equanimity. So the whole purpose of the 6 R's is to bring the mind back to a state of equanimity where there isn't the attachment or the aversion, where even if things are neither pleasant nor unpleasant, there isn't a disinterest in that, but there's the recognition that this is equanimity. So we've released from aversion, we've released from attachment. We're in a place of neither attachment nor aversion, neither pleasant nor unpleasant holding, and the mind is becoming equanimous. And of course, then we have the advantage here of being equanimous when there's pleasant experience, and equanimous when there's unpleasant experience. Equanimity doesn't mean that we don't experience the pleasant. It means that we don't take it personally. It doesn't mean that we don't experience the unpleasant. It means that we don't take it personally. And then finally, what I'd like to talk about here is what supports our development of the factors of enlightenment. What in terms of environment supports that process? And the Buddha again described this. So we're going to look at, again, in chapter 46, it's number 12. It's called the simile of the sun. Bhikkhus, this is the forerunner, the precursor of the arising of the sun, that is, the dawn. So too, bhikkhus. For a bhikkhu, this is the forerunner and precursor of the arising of the 7 factors of enlightenment, that is, good friendship. This is kalyana mitta. Now, Ananda went to the bhikkhu on one occasion, and he was clearly enamored by the quality of the bhikkhus that he was with and what they were giving him. And he said to the Buddha, Buddha, kalyana mitta, good friendship, is half of the holy life. And the Buddha said, do not say this, Ananda. Do not say this. Kalyana mitta, good friendship, is the whole of the holy life. So, for a bhikkhu, this is the forerunner and precursor of the arising of the 7 factors of enlightenment. That is good friendship. When a bhikkhu has a good friend, it is to be expected that he will develop and cultivate the 7 factors of enlightenment. So, good friendship is really, really important. Okay? But it's not everything. Because in the next sutta, number 13, also called simile of the sun, and bhikkhus, it is the forerunner and precursor of the arising of the sun, and that is the dawn. So too, bhikkhus, for a bhikkhu, this is the forerunner and precursor of the arising of the 7 factors of enlightenment. That is careful attention. When a bhikkhu is accomplished in careful attention, it is to be expected that he will develop and cultivate the 7 factors of enlightenment. So, good friendship and careful attention are the critical components for the development of the factors of enlightenment. The good friendship is in the context of Dharma friends. So this is bringing the Dharma to life through this dialogue and through example. And then the careful attention develops the mindfulness from the perspective of Dharma. And when we do that, as we saw in the other sutta reference, there's a natural evolution of the factors of enlightenment. The mindfulness gives rise to the investigation of states. The investigation of states gives rise to energy. The energy gives rise to spiritual joy. The spiritual joy brings the mind into tranquility. With tranquility comes the collectedness, and with the collectedness comes the equanimity. And the Buddha said, if you're going to work with releasing away from the hindrances and developing the Brahma Viharas: loving kindness, compassion, sympathetic joy, and equanimity. What gives it the direction towards liberation is the simultaneous development of the factors of enlightenment. Okay, so that's been a lot to listen to. So perhaps just let's take a few moments just to quietly reflect on that. And then if you have any questions, I'll be very happy to take them. So sit comfortably. So first of all, we need to develop comfort in the body. So what's helpful here is to work with our energetic body rather than the physical one. So bring your attention below the navel, about 3 or 4 fingers, and halfway in the body, it's an energetic center. And just invite that center to provide the support in your body. And then we just need to relax, bring tranquility into the physical body. So you can rotate your inner thighs. It's an inward rotation of the inner thighs. It's just very small, but it releases your hips. It's a medial rotation. Drop the inner edge of your shoulder blades, not to pull the shoulders down, but just let the shoulder blades rotate to create space and openness around your heart. Softly smile and relax your jaw, relax your stomach. Relax any tension around your brain, soften the crown of your head. Let your spine come back into balance, and then deeply relax your body. Bring up the feeling of loving kindness, however you normally do that in your practice. Perhaps remembering a time when you felt joyful and happy. And then just be aware of the characteristic of that loving kindness. Perhaps just a smile, or maybe a warm, glowing feeling in the front of your heart, or anything else. What it is doesn't matter, but just know that you associate that with the joyfulness. And then let the memory just release. It may continue on its own, but don't fuel it with your attention. Simply stay with the feeling of the loving kindness, the sensation. And say to yourself, may I be well, may I be joyful, may I be happy. May my mind be peaceful, calm, expansive. And my heart open, accepting, and full of love. And then, as it said in the sutta, expand this into all quarters, in front, behind, to the left, to the right, above and below, in all directions. And then, as Bhante Viramati used to say, simply observe the movements of your mind. And it's in observing the movements of mind we bring to life the teaching of the Dhamma. Seeing impermanence. Seeing how when things are not permanent, they often create dukkha, suffering, unsatisfactionness, dissatisfaction. And the fact that we can't control what's going on and it won't obey what we would wish, this is anatta, non-self. And so by observing movements of mind, we're beginning to use our mindfulness from the framework of the Dhamma. And we start to develop a curiosity and investigation into what is going on simply by noticing these movements and siksaring. And so we automatically begin to develop the factors of enlightenment. Each will feed and develop the next. And if you're ever fortunate enough to come on retreat with Bhante Dhamma Gavesi, the strong aspect of his teaching is about this automatic development of the factors of enlightenment. Now, feel your seat on the chair or feet on the floor. Take a deliberate breath in and out. And softly and gently open your eyes. So, the importance of the factors of enlightenment. Do you have any questions? Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, Hugh. I've got two questions just to be sure I noted it down correct. So, the nutriments, when we're talking about the nutriments for each of the factors, so I note down the nutriment for the arisen of mindfulness is frequently giving attention to that. Does that mean we're simply using 6 Rs to note, observe, when the mind's attention move away, and then to use the 6R to bring it back? Did I understand that correctly?
Well, some of the aspects of mindfulness you could think of as the four satipatthanas, in the sense that we're being mindful of body, we're being mindful of feelings, we're being mindful of the mind, and then mindful of phenomena in the mind. So those are factors that develop mindfulness. But one of the things that comes through in these passages is the importance of Dhamma being the basis of, or the mindfulness being looking at aspects of the Dhamma. And if we look at aspects of the Dhamma, we're looking at things like impermanence and dukkha and non-self, and the causality that goes through, and the fact that the Four Noble Truths, that dukkha exists and this has its cause, but it also has its cessation. So the mindfulness, if you like, is through the lens of the Dharma, and our inquiry is to pay careful attention to when we seeing through that lens. I think Sister Kima would sometimes say you can be mindful of anything. You could be a mindful bank robber. You have to be very, very careful about what you're doing and apply your awareness in a particular way. There's nothing about mindfulness itself which is either moral or immoral. It's an amoral activity. It's how we apply it and what lens we're using our mindfulness to cultivate experience and understanding. So the coming through the lens of Dharma is what sets that direction. I'm not sure if I've answered that question. I might have gone off track.
Yes, at least I note down that basically going back to the four foundations of mindfulness as a guide to develop develop the nutriment for that enlightenment factor of mindfulness. And I have one more question, which is the nutriment for the enlightenment factor of equanimity. So I wrote here, which is bringing back the mind to neither be attached to the pleasant or being averse to the unpleasant, i.e. not taking things personally. Is that correct? Did I get that right?
Yes, because I think you could say that the 6 Rs embraces all of the factors of enlightenment. So the first of the 6 Rs is recognizing that the mind has moved away. So that is mindfulness itself. So when our mind has got distracted, we've lost our mindfulness. But the moment we recognize our mind has got distracted, mindfulness is back. Okay. So that recognition is the first enlightenment factor of mindfulness. Then the releasing away from that is all about the recognition of the state the mind is in. So here's the investigation, and changing the energy. Yes. So our energy has become dispersed, if you like, because it's got caught up on something else. So then we have to bring it back. And that's about the endeavor and the persistence, and that we need to bring our energy back. So that's the release. And then we're going to the relax. So what happens when we relax the mind? So we have investigation, we've got energy, then we've got joy. We've got this spiritual joy. When we relax the mind becomes spacious. The body becomes spacious. This is a joyful state. Think of times when, even in our mundane lives, we felt happy. Yes. Do we feel happy in a cramped and restricted way? Or when we feel happiness, do we feel expansive and open? So here's the joyfulness coming back in. And then, having relaxed the tension around our brain, we re-smile. So here is another aspect of the joy. The relaxing and the re-smiling takes us away from that engagement to a place of non-engagement, being attached to something that's happened or aversive to something that happened, to not. So here's the tranquility. That's that process. By cultivating that tranquility, we're back into the collected mind again. And when we come through the fulfillment of the 6R, coming through the whole of the cycle, and repeating the cycle maintains equanimity in our practice. So if you look at it in that way, you can see all of the factors of enlightenment through the 6R process. So the 6R process is about maintaining and allowing to persist the sense of equanimity. Has that answered your question?
Yes, thank you. Thanks for nicely summarizing it. Thank you.
Oh, hello, Jay.
Paul, I have a question in relation to the meditation practice, how we started. You said focus on pay attention to the three fingers below the navel as the energy center.
I'm
How
sorry,
does that?
my sound's not so good, but please say that again.
So,
I think we've temporarily lost you, Jay.
can you hear me? Can you hear me?
I can hear you. I think I can hear you now.
Yeah. So you said to pay attention to three fingers below the energy center
Oh, yes.
before we. So how does that help? How does that help the whole process?
Well, it's part of the Sakita yoga that we've developed which is very supportive of the meditation. The energetic body allows us to deeply relax the physical body for support, because the energetic body can support us. And one of the tasks we have is to be able to discriminate constructive tension from actually tension of aversion or attachment. But when we work with the energetic body, we can release all tension. So then we can be very clear about when tension arises and when to release it. And also, when we allow the energetic body to support us, then we become very sensitive to change in state of mind, because tension arises in the body. So over the last few years, when I've been teaching with Bhante Dhamma, we've been incorporating Sakita Yoga as part of the practice. So to develop this sensitivity to awareness of the arising of tension. But not only that, it then means that we have a modality, a way of incorporating the qualities of the meditation into daily life, because we can actually move and operate in daily life from this energetic center rather than from the physical as well. So it's a very helpful process and support for for seeing the Buddha's teaching very clearly expressed in the body. So and then instead of the body being something we need to reject because we're afraid of attachment to it, it becomes an aid to the meditation. See, one of the things about the energetic body is we can't have attachment to the body for the energetic body to work. We have to let the physical body go. Yeah. And when we relax and release the physical body, any sort of identity with the body also begins to get released. So then it's a practice which, instead of cultivating an enchantment with the body, it begins to develop the state of mind which is actually relinquishing the body, because it's moving towards the energetic instead. So this is also very helpful as a framework for relinquishing. And if we look at the development through the jhanas, for instance, each stage as we move from one jhana to the next is a process of relinquishing something. So there are two ways of thinking of the jhanas. I'm attaining the next one, and attaining the next one, and attaining the next one. So it's like an accumulation of things. Or we can think of the jhanas as I'm relinquishing something, and then I'm relinquishing something else, and then I'm relinquishing something else. And the Buddha's teaching is about relinquishment. So as we move from into the first jhana, we've let go of the hindrances. As we move into the second jhana, we let go of thinking and examining thought. As we move into the third jhana, we've let go of the uplifting joy that comes with the second jhana. And as we move through the jhanas, we're progressively letting go of other things. And personally speaking, I believe that the teaching on relinquishment is extremely important, because it's part of what makes the Buddha's teaching different. Yeah. Did that answer your question, Jay? Yep. Okay. Good. Does anyone else have a question about the topics that we've been covering today, or any other aspect of practice?
Hugh, thank
Yes,
you
Nana.
very much for the excellent talk. Very, very useful. Very, very relevant to me for my twin practice. I want to be clear about, you said something like seeing through the lens. Does it mean experientially understanding Dhamma? And also, does it mean that I'm seeing the dependent origination? Is
Okay.
it seeing means, is it seeing from the eyes, or is it understanding the Dhamma?
I think, let's take that last bit first. I think it's an intuitive understanding. It's not a rational one. It's an intuitive one based on experience and direct experience. So what is it that we're directly experiencing? Well, let's take this from the perspective of what the Buddha described as wisdom, or wisdom in the sense of the opposite of ignorance. So the opposite of ignorance for the Buddha was to be able to see impermanence, was to be able to see how things that are impermanent create the sense of dukkha, dissatisfaction. So what do we mean there? Well, very basically, if there's something pleasant, then we're fearful we're going to lose it. So there's the dukkha. If there's something unpleasant, we're fearful it's not going to go away, and there's the dukkha. So yeah, so if there's impermanence and dukkha, and then the fact that we can't keep what's pleasant. In other words, it's not under our control is an aspect of anatta, of whatever it is we're experiencing is not self. Because if it was self, it would be completely under our control if it was some permanent, unchanging entity of ourselves. So seeing things from that point, those perspectives is part of what is not ignorance. Seeing causality, seeing that, as the Buddha said, because of this, that arises. When this appears, that appears. When this ceases, that ceases. When this disappears, that disappears. So seeing causality, that everything is in a conditioned environment. Okay. And finally, understanding that, yes, that dukkha exists. Not that everything is dukkha, but everything has the capacity to be dukkha, depending on our relationship to it. This cup doesn't have dukkha in it. But if this cup represents something to me, I'm attached to it because of who gave it to me, or the circumstances in which I acquired it, or the pleasure I have in holding it, then the thought of it breaking becomes a source of dukkha. Yes. So everything has the capacity to create dukkha. What's the difference is that the origin of that dukkha comes from craving, our liking it or not liking it. The I like it, I don't like it mind, the I want it, I don't want it mind. So this is tanha. So recognizing this craving in us creates the dukkha. So the Buddha said, well, what's the release from this dukkha? And it is to release this craving. So if we see that process going on, we're also observing and investigating from the lens of Dhamma. And then, of course, the fourth noble truth is to recognize that there's a path to this development. So, seeing impermanence, dukkha, anatta, seeing causality, and seeing the truth around dukkha, the role that tanha plays, craving plays. This is the lens through which we should be investigating phenomena. And that investigation is fed by mindfulness. But the mindfulness needs to be, if you like, directed towards those aspects of Dhamma. So when we see impermanence, we're curious, we allow it to be a part of our attention. So this then sets the direction towards liberation, because the mindfulness is through the lens of Dhamma. Has that answered your question, Nanda? If not, please come back.
That's brilliant. Great. Thank you very much. Excellent. You. Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions? Paul, how are you doing today?
Okay, thank you. Yes. Very nice talk. Thank you.
Good. I hope in the way that it's framed that what I would wish is that it's relatable in terms of practice. So I'm keen not just to present a theoretical perspective. So I'd be interested in just feedback from all of you here about whether it feels relevant to practice or not.
Yes, very much so. It's very relatable to the practice rather than book learning. Yeah, definitely.
Okay.
Thank you.
And I think that's what's wonderful about the suttas. They can be read as book learning, but if we just change our perspective a little bit on it, we can see that what's actually been captured in the suttas is the Buddha talking at a very sort of interactive, humane way with people, dealing with aspects of practice. And you know, Bhante Vimramsi and particularly Sister Kema, you know, one of their revelations, if you like, was to realize that the suttas were literally sort of kind of recordings of lessons. And if we only look at them in those ways, they can be as relevant to us as they were to the people that they were given to. And I found that a transformative way of viewing the suttas. And Pai, how are you today? You just sent the message, fair to miggling. Well, I hope you're more miggling than fair, and may it go to good. Do you have any question you'd like to ask, or any comment on the discourse? No? Well, that's fine. Okay, May, just back to you. Anything else you'd like to ask before we wrap up?
Hugh, could I ask another question, please?
Of course, Nan.
Thank you. Hugh, I want to be clear about something, and if you could correct me, please, I would be grateful.
You might not need any correction.
Am I right in thinking when I practice 6R and go through the jhana process every day, twice a day, eventually the 7 awakening factors will be cultivated and developed and will be balanced, and when I am ready, when causes and conditions are right, I will attain different attainments. There are 8 attainments to attain. Is that understanding correct? Or when I practice 6R and go through the jhanas, do I have to intentionally balance the 7 awakening factors? The third question is, I'm finding it difficult to balance the awakening factors. When I try to balance it, I just completely come out of jhana, and that's the end of the meditation. So if I do not attempt to correct or balance the 7 jhanas, then I start my meditation and then I finish my meditation. So I would like you to comment on this, please, for me.
Okay. Well, I can only comment from my perspective, but what I would say is that if we, in our meditation, if we set out to do something, we are already putting a framework in the mind of wanting a particular outcome. And anytime we want a particular outcome, our meditation normally will become very disrupted. So what I think is really important is to set up the conditions for the meditation to unfold on its own. And so our effort is around maintaining the conditions, not in trying to develop a particular state. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, setting up the conditions means, at a very basic level, not being perhaps in an environment or in a position where we feel a lot of discomfort or distraction. Now, if we're relatively young in our practice, that might mean that we need to be in a quiet room, we need to be in a comfortable sitting position. But as our practice develops, we can increasingly sit in noisy environments and places that are unconducive, because we're setting up internal conditions, not external conditions. So the internal conditions are the commitment to the 6 R's, for instance. Now, the 6 R's, as I was explaining earlier, automatically begin to balance out the factors of enlightenment. They're a natural process. Now, the challenge with attainments is, I think, the word attainment. In daily life, attainments are things that we get when we put in the requisite amount of effort and intention and focus and all the rest of it. And then we get something which is ours to keep. Well, I personally, in my own practice, much prefer the relinquishment perspective rather than the acquisition perspective. So the conditions in my mind are around what is it I need to let go of, rather than what is it that I need to acquire. And so setting up my mind with the perspective of relinquishing is an important initial condition. So we can look at the outward conditions. Am I comfortable? Is the environment conducive? But then the internal conditions, the commitment to 6R. I'm going to use the Brahma Viharas as the vehicle. So I'm going to generate the loving kindness. I don't need to decide the next Brahma Vihara, because as we progress through the jhanas, or through the Brahma Viharas naturally evolve. And I love this natural evolution. We've got that passage in the Bojjhanga Samyutta, which is saying that we naturally move through the factors of enlightenment. Well, we naturally move through the Brahma Viharas. Loving kindness will evolve into compassion, and compassion will evolve into sympathetic joy. Sympathetic joy will evolve into equanimity. Similarly, the jhanas, as we set up the conditions, the first jhana will naturally evolve into the second, will naturally evolve into the third, will naturally evolve into the fourth, unless we set up a condition in the mind to do something different. So there is a practice that Bhante Viramsi described, which is becoming an expert in different jhanas, where you make a determination about which jhana you're looking to explore. But he was very careful when he described this. He said, you can't say, I'm going to sit in 4th jhana for this meditation. He said, what you have to do, if you want to do this, is say, today in this practice, I will go no higher than the 4th jhana. So you might just stay in the 1st or the 2nd or the 3rd, or be in the 4th. Okay. Again, if we're too acquisitional, if we're too deterministic about the outcome, it disrupts the meditation. So, do we have to individually cultivate certain aspects of the factors of enlightenment? No, they will evolve naturally. Can we help the process along? Well, yes. There are suttas which describe that if we have too much energy, then we need to develop tranquility. Well, tranquility, what I would describe as, how do I then develop tranquility in that moment? Well, it's enough to recognize that tranquility is needed. Okay, so this changes the intention in the mind. Ah, I need more tranquility. Okay, or if sloth and torpor is coming through, we might feel that we need more energy. So it's enough to, we've taken interest in the fact that sloth and torpor is there, and that in itself has generated the energy. Or maybe there's too much restlessness and we need to develop the equanimity. Well, that's telling our mind that we don't need to engage in what we're engaging with it to the same degree. So this is a balancing out rather than a deliberate cultivation of individual states. So it's really about cultivating the conditions and then gently giving a nudge to the right or a nudge to the left as your practice is going along. And Bandiran Ramsey would describe this as balancing. So there's a lovely sutta, I think it's in the, can't remember. It's the sutta about the lute player. And so the Buddha was walking in the woods and he came across a path that a monk had been using for meditation. And he saw that it was bloodstained. So he went to the monk, and this monk had previously been a lute player in the palace. And he said, well, he just asked, what's going on here? And the lute player said, I've been concentrating really hard. I've been doing lots and lots of walking meditation. And the Buddha said, well, you used to play a lute. What happened when the strings were too tight? And he would go, oh, make a terrible noise. And he said, well, what happened when the strings were too loose? Well, you get no noise out of it at all, no sound out of it at all. So what did you used to do? He said, well, you just need to finely tune the practice. And he said, well, that's what you need to do here. Not go to one excess or to the other. So when we set up the conditions, we nudge just to the left, just to the right. And part of that is recognizing where we are and just saying to ourselves, I'm a little bit too, my mind's vacillating a little bit. I need a little bit more energy. Or I'm a little bit too restless and I need to, or I'm investigating states too much. I've got entranced by seeing impermanence. Well, that's not the purpose either. The investigation is just to recognize what's going on, but not to get caught up in it. So instead of investigating so much, we need to bring a more collected response. Just be aware of what's going on. The collected mind is a wide mind, not a narrowly focused mind. It's a wide mind that sees what's going on without getting caught up. So, Nanda, has that addressed some of the questions you were asking?
Yeah, absolutely brilliant. Thank you very much. I'm understanding what I'm doing wrong. Thank you very much. Thanks a lot.
All right. Anything else? No? Okay, then perhaps we should just finish with the closing prayer. May suffering ones be suffering free, and the fear-struck fearless be. May the grieving shed all grief, and may all beings find relief. May all beings share this merit that we have thus acquired for the acquisition of all kinds of happiness. May Devas and Nagas of mighty power share this merit of ours. May they long preserve the Buddha's dispensation. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Well, thank you all for all your contributions. Questions are really, really helpful. They bring out other aspects. And sometimes you ask questions that I haven't asked myself, and I'm just as interested to see what answers come out. So thank you very much. And I look forward to the time we get a chance to do this again. And thank you, May, for hosting the meeting.
Thank you, Hugh, and everyone. Have a good rest of the day. Bye.
Bye now.